And thank you, everyone, for joining us for this Congressional Town Hall. I'm Brian Loftus. Joining me are Kirsten Joyce and Steve Sebelius. For the next half hour, this will focus on the pandemic, the federal response, and what our representatives in Washington, D.C. are doing to fix the problems. Now, this comes as Nevada approaches 5,000 COVID-19 cases. There have also been 237 deaths, and we just passed the 50,000 tests performed mark.
We are doing this via Zoom so everyone is safely socially distanced. We did extend the invitation to join us to Nevada's entire delegation. And joining us this evening are the three House members who represent Southern Nevada: Congresswoman Dina Titus, Congresswoman Susie Lee, and Congressman Steven Horsford. We have collected some questions from our viewers as well, and we have a few of our own. Brian?
Let's start off with the number one thing we get asked about: unemployment. There are lots of complaints of delays and backlogs because so many people have applied. Now, it is largely up to the state agency that runs it, DETR, to fix those problems. However, it is largely funded by federal money. For most of this, we are going to direct questions to individual congresspeople. But for this one, we want you all to weigh in. Let's start with Congressman Horsford. Has Governor Sisolak asked you to help get more money, Congressman, for unemployment to help with the backup?
Well, good evening. I wanted to thank all of you for joining, for letting us join, and to my colleagues, Congresswoman Dina Titus and Susie Lee. We understand how hard this situation is for so many families, and we are working to provide relief to Nevada families, to Nevada workers, and to Nevada businesses. And to your question, actually in the first bill that we passed, the Families First Act, it helped to provide up to $10 million of funding to Nevada, specifically to help with the unemployment system, to allow them to hire more staff and to upgrade their software. We understand the frustrations that people are waiting far too long to get through, but we know that help is starting to get processed. Unemployment checks are beginning to be processed, and we will continue to work with the governor and the state agencies to make sure that families get the relief that they need.
And Congresswoman Lee, same question again. Governor Sisolak, what can be done? What can you do to help the state with that problem? We're hearing from so many people on the issue of unemployment. Congresswoman Lee?
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for having all of us here, and I'm happy to join my colleagues, Congresswoman Titus and Steven Horsford. Have to give Steven a happy birthday wish today. But listen, unemployment in our state is tragic. And we've seen close to 390,000 people apply for unemployment in the last 6 weeks. Just to put that in perspective, there were 319,000 individuals who applied for employment in 2019, the entire year alone. And the fact that under the Families First Act and the CARES Act, we made provisions to make sure that 1099 employees, gig employees, independent contractors will have access to unemployment insurance. That is a system that has never been set up before. So the DETR, the unemployment office, is basically building that system as we're trying to get the resources out to individuals. So we understand the frustration. I think that both Congresswoman Titus and Horsford have probably gotten the calls that I've received in my office, a lot of frustration on the end of people who have applied for unemployment insurance. I do want to say to individuals, the DETR has put out YouTube videos in both English and Spanish to teach people exactly what they need to apply for unemployment. Just make sure if you are filling out new claims, that you do it completely and accurately from the get-go. A lot of the disruption are people who are having to go back and correct things. The bottom line is Nevada will be coming out of this crisis in a piecemeal fashion. There will be need to extend unemployment insurance, and I know that I'll be on the front line fighting for that for our Nevada families.
Congresswoman Lee, we thank you for that. Congresswoman Titus, if we could just ask you to unmute so we can fully hear you. And also now please weigh in on this issue of unemployment and the office that is engendering so much frustration in the Valley.
Well, our first attempt to help get people back up on their feet was a $1,200 check to everybody who has a Social Security number. and to expand unemployment. We wanted a program that worked from the bottom up, not from the corporations down, take care of our workers. So unemployment was expanded in 3 ways. One way, as Susie mentioned, it now includes people who never could qualify for it before in the gig economy, special contractors, Uber drivers, self-employed, so now they can qualify. The second way is it was expanded in terms of the length of time for which you could receive unemployment. And third, we added a federal supplement to what you would get from state unemployment of $600 a week. So all of that is to try to help you just kind of make it through this. We get 100 calls a day, and unemployment is probably the #1 call, that and small business loans. They have just been swamped at the state level. They've hired another couple of hundred people. They've brought an independent contractor in to help with the phone calls. They have a new director as of the last couple of days in charge of the whole program, and they have set it up so that you can go on the website or you can call, and you call on different days depending on the first letter of your last name in hopes of getting this all out. They've already issued a record number of responded to a record number of applications just in the 3 weeks since this has been passed. It seems like an eternity, but it's really only been a couple of weeks. I can understand that people need the money now, but one thing to remember is once you get the application approved, that money is retroactive back to the time that you became unemployed. So you will eventually get the money that you are missing if you haven't received it already. That's not lost time or lost money.
Congresswoman Titus, we thank you for that answer. We're going to take a brief break right now and circle back with more of your questions. Stay with us right here on 8 News Now. Welcome back to our Congressional Town Hall. Congresswoman Lee, we have a question for you. Our viewer Kelly Busig weighed in asking, what happens to people who are essential employees but hours are cut from 40 a week to 20 per week? They don't qualify for unemployment for the other 20. What plan is in place for people like us?
Well, my understanding is if your hours are cut, you are eligible for unemployment for the reduction in the hours. Also, as Congresswoman Titus pointed out, the $1,200 per family earning under $75,000 or per individual under $75,000, plus the $500 per child under the age of 17. My understanding is if your hours are cut, you are eligible for the reduction in pay for those hours.
Thank you, Representative Lee, and I'm going to send it over to my colleague, Steve Sebelius, who has more.
Thanks, Brian. A lot of small business owners want to know about the Paycheck Protection Program, which gives loans to small business owners. So we synthesized several questions into a specific one. Congresswoman Lee, this first to you. Will the Paycheck Protection Program need more money in the future, and can you give us a total number that you expect for that program?
Well, first of all, the Paycheck Protection Program started out with $250 billion in it, the first tranche of money, which ran out relatively quickly. We just passed this interim bill, which put another $310 billion into the program. One important thing that we fought for, especially this delegation, was to ensure that small and medium-sized businesses, that $60 billion was set aside, $30 billion for medium-sized community banks, credit unions, CDFIs, and $30 billion for smaller entities as well. We found that in the first tranche of money, it seemed that more well-established companies who had relationships with banks were the ones who accessed those loans. So we fought hard to make sure that our smaller mom and pop shops will get access to that money. Listen, I've heard estimates up to $1 trillion or up to $1 trillion that would be needed in total for this program. Again, this is something that we need to understand how we're going to reopen our economy, but we certainly understand in Nevada that we're going to see a long recovery. And we will be continuing to fight to expand that program to make sure we're protecting the paychecks of employees of small businesses.
Congresswoman, thank you very much. Congressman Horsford, same subject, slightly different question. Nevada's gotten fewer of those Paycheck Protection Program loans than similarly sized states. What do you think can be done to fix that?
Well, Nevada ranked 43rd out of 50 states in the first round of funding. And because of the leadership of this delegation pushing the administration, we were able to get them to change the guidance that allowed for small businesses that have a portion of their revenue from gaming to now be eligible. And that program is up and running. The funds have been replenished. We are encouraging people to apply. If you are already in line, you don't lose your place in line. And if you didn't apply, you can apply now. Also, we need to address the systemic issues. Nevada does not have as many chartered banks in our state like Idaho and Iowa and other states like that. That's a problem. And then the third issue was this program was set up with only a week's worth of preparation by the administration. There was not the proper guidance given to local banks or businesses, quite honestly, particularly those mom and pop size businesses who needed time to get their paperwork in order. So those are issues which have now been addressed, and we're encouraging people to apply. The funds are available, and we'll keep fighting to get more resources to help the small businesses in Nevada.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. Now, this last question, Congresswoman Dina Titus, to you. The Treasury Department reversed course and has said that smaller companies that rely on gaming revenue can apply for those paycheck protection loans, but there's a huge backlog of businesses that have already applied. Are you confident those small gaming companies will still get the help?
Well, I'm more optimistic than I was before. You know, we always have to fight to be sure that gaming is included in any kind of recovery package. If you'll recall, after Katrina, gaming was specifically excluded. In the bill that provided the PPP, the loans to small businesses, we didn't exclude those little gaming casinos, those gaming businesses. A lot of those are here in Nevada. It was a regulation that was outdated that was enacted by the SBA. So we went to work trying to get that undone. They undid it a little bit, but not enough to do any good. I introduced a bill to undo it. The Senate then introduced a companion. We were all together fighting that, Mark Amadei using his Republican connections. But I have to say that it's Erica in my office who was on this from day one and fighting through the gaming caucus to be sure that they are included. You know, a lot of those were in the ready to go with their applications. They knew this was a problem. The minute it got fixed, they were ready to submit their applications. So I hope that under the new provisions that allow money for small businesses, that put money in small banks and credit unions, so it will go to small businesses that are women-owned or minority-owned, they will be able to. But like Susie said, I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't come back and put more money into this plan. I would also point out, though, that in addition to these loans, and there are EIDL loans, too, that have been in place for a long time under the SBA that help you get a loan that turns into a grant if you use it for certain things like mortgages, rent, keeping personnel on, utilities. There are a number of pro-business tax provisions in the bill as well that small businesses and those that are casinos can take advantage of.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We appreciate it. Well, coming up after a short break, a few questions from our viewers about frontline workers. Stay with us.
Welcome back to our virtual town hall. This next question is for Congresswoman Lee from some of our viewers who are asking, what about hazardous pay for hospital workers and other essential workers?
Yeah, you know, our frontline workers have really been putting their lives at risk trying to take care of patients with coronavirus, especially with the fact that we've seen a disruption in the supply of protective equipment for those individuals. One thing that we made sure to put in this package, the last package we passed was $75 billion to go directly to healthcare facilities to provide them with that support. Our essential workers frontline tend to sometimes be some of our lowest paid employees. We are working on a CARES 2 package that will look at hazard pay. It also is going to look at OSHA standards to make sure that, and it shouldn't be either or. It should be both to make sure that we're protecting those frontline employees who've been so critical to helping us fight this virus.
All right, thank you very much, Congresswoman Lee. This now from an anonymous viewer for Congressman Horsford. Should frontline workers like hospital workers or, as mentioned, grocery store employees get a tax holiday or a tax break?
Yes, we should support those who are literally putting their lives out on the lines in order to help all of us. They should get whatever relief they can. I know right now a lot of that comes from our state and local governments. That's why we are fighting to secure additional money to help our state and local governments fund those essential workers. We secured $1.25 billion in the first CARES bill. Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader, just said, let the states go bankrupt, which is outrageous. These are the states that fund essential services that all of our constituents depend on, including funding our essential workers, teachers, healthcare workers, people in public safety, firefighters. So we need the Senate to work with the House on this next package so that we can properly fund state and local government at all levels.
All right, thank you very much. We appreciate that input. We have more questions still to come on our virtual town hall, of course, with Congresswoman Dina Titus, too. Stay with us.
Welcome back to our Congressional Town Hall. This next question is for Congresswoman Dina Titus. The head of Tyson Foods said this week that the food supply chain is breaking down. Congresswoman, what actions can Congress take to ensure that food is still coming here to Las Vegas?
Well, I've already called on the Agriculture Secretary, Sonny Perdue, to do something about this. This is just shameful. You've got Idaho dumping potatoes, got the Midwest dumping milk now. You've got some of the meat packing plants shutting down. We want all these places to be safe for the workers. But look at the long lines at the food banks here at 3 Square. There should be some way to coordinate between the people who are dumping food because there's an excess and those who need food so we can feed the hungry. Certainly school lunch programs would be a good place to put some of that. And once again, this is an example of the total failure of having a federal policy that looks at this issue nationally and an administration that is both informed and engaged. They are neither.
We appreciate it. Thanks very much. Kirsten?
All right. Thank you, Steve. We do want to thank Congresswoman Dina Titus and Susie Lee, as well as Congressman Steven Horsford, for joining us. We are going to continue this discussion on our website, 8newsnow.com, right now on our Facebook page.
And Congressman Horsford, we have to say happy birthday, joining us on his birthday. We are always on at 8newsnow.com, along with our app, along with Facebook and Twitter. Be sure to watch 8 News Now at 11. And again, our online version of this discussion does continue right now. So stay with us for that. And thank you so much for watching 8 News Now. Have a great night. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We are off TV and continuing our Congressional Town Hall online. I'm Brian Loftus. Joining me is my friend Kirsten Joyce, my other friend Steve Sebelius across the studio. For the next half hour, this will focus on the pandemic, the federal response, and what our representatives in Washington, D.C. are doing to address the problems. Now, we're doing all of this via Zoom, so everyone is, of course, safely social distance.
We extended the invitation to join us to Nevada's entire delegation. We had Congresswoman Dina Titus joining us for the past half hour as well. For this next half hour, Congresswoman Susie Lee and Congressman Steven Horsford will continue along with us, and they will both be answering all of these questions. Now, the big question is, when will Nevada and the rest of America open back up? Our governor will be giving us his roadmap and more answers tomorrow, but we do want to get your insight. First off, do you trust the CDC guidelines and the phased approach? You can both answer this. Congresswoman Lee, we'll start with you.
First of all, the governor is going to release his plan, I believe, tomorrow, which calls for a phased approach. I know Nevada has joined several Western states in forming a pact. But I think it's important to remember that, first of all, the devastation we're feeling in Nevada is the result of this administration being caught flat-footed on testing. And we are nowhere near the level of testing that we need to be. It's not just about a decision by the governor or an economic advisory committee to basically say we're open for business. This is a public health crisis. People have to be comfortable that when they go out into a business, they are going to be safe, that they are not going to contract a virus that could potentially kill them. Right now, we're doing about 1,000 tests a day in Nevada. We're doing about 200,000 tests across the country. Across the country, we should be doing at a minimum 5 million tests a day. We are so vastly behind on providing the adequate amount of testing that we need. And it's not just testing. Right now, we are only testing people that have symptoms. And so basically, we know that this virus can be transmitted by people who are asymptomatic. We need to be able to provide a level of testing that we can offer to people who are on the front line, to people who are working. So we have to do a random sample of our community to understand the community spread of this virus. We are nowhere close to doing that. So what we are going to do is open up in a tiered approach that basically our guideline is going to be, we're going to watch the hospital admittance, we're going to watch our death rate, and if we see that go up, guess what? We're going to have to close down and go back to the restrictions that we've had. I would like to see, and we called for $25 billion, not only money, but a national strategy. Right now, the president of this country basically said it's up to all the states to go and develop your own testing. We've seen disruption in the supply chain. We don't have enough raw materials. We don't know, there's not a coordination among the capacity that we have. It is a big quagmire. And this is the role that the federal government should be playing in a national strategy, national coordination on the supply chain, and getting our testing system up to an adequate level so we can open up the economy in a safe way where we're not risking lives. Anything we do without that, we will be risking lives. It may be a risk that people are willing to take. But again, this is it. We're not going to, the economy will only rebound when people are comfortable going out in public and accessing businesses. And certainly businesses like our casinos, our tourism business that rely on that human interaction. So, we know that we're going to do a tiered approach, but the tier, we risk having basically come through 6 weeks of a shutdown. Right. And by the way, Nevada has seen, 200 and some deaths, 5,000 infections, 225 deaths. That's relatively low comparatively. And that's because we had to shut down our entire economy because we did not have the testing that we needed to do to be able to isolate and track this virus. And so we have a long way to go. But again, I hope that we can open it up in such a way and basically that people would adhere to social distancing, washing their hands, wearing masks when they're out in public to prevent the transmission of that, because that's what we're going to rely on in a tiered approach on opening the economy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your input there. Congressman Horsford, the same question, but do you have a target date for reopening?
I support the governor and that approach that needs to be taken. And I concur with what Susie said, because they did the right things to begin with by closing down our state. When they did, it helped us to avoid having a much worse scenario with much higher infections and higher death rates. I also concur that we need to have a very robust testing apparatus in place. We have provided $25 billion of funding and required a national strategy. I want to commend our local leaders like Commissioner Marilyn Kirkpatrick and the Southern Nevada Health District, who are working very hard to make sure that that gets done throughout Clark County. Just this last weekend, they had testing set up at the MLK Senior Center in my district, where they tested over 200 seniors, and they're working to increase that capacity. They'll have drive-through locations set up here in the coming week. And so that's what we're going to need to have in place in order for us to be able to reopen. So what I want is for workers to be safe. I want customers and travelers to have the confidence to be able to go out and to go to our businesses and to our major casinos. And I want to ensure that all of our public health is protected. As long as we can do those three things, then we can open in a safe and secure manner. But until we have those precautions in place, to do so would only put us right back into the same situation.
Thank you, Congressman Horsford. We greatly appreciate that. Steve, I'll let you take it now.
Well, let's stay on the same subject of reopening. What businesses do you think should reopen first? For example, should people be able to go to gyms and restaurants, but maybe something like nightclubs stay closed? It is the governor's decision, but Congresswoman Lee, what do you think ought to open first?
Listen, I think that we need to do an opening of businesses that where there isn't an extended amount of human-on-human contact. I find it strange that gyms would be the first tranche of opening. I mean, when I think about touching machines, breathing in air around other people, I guess I would expect that maybe they think you can social distance better in a gym. Maybe they'll only let a certain amount of people in. You'll have to wipe down your equipment after you're done. So I think what we're going to see is an opening of more curbside drop-off where you can call, place an order, come pick it up, dry cleaners, etc. Your auto part shops, your auto shops. So I personally think that would be your first phase. Then you move more to those businesses that you'd see more human-on-human contact, like restaurants, etc. One thing I want to say is our restaurant industry here in Nevada obviously was devastated, has been devastated by this. One of the things that we will be working on, because think about it, even if we open up to restaurants at this point, it will be where we're asking them to take out some tables so you can practice social distancing. They're going to have extra costs to get PPE for their employees. There probably won't be any menus on, no buffets, no menus, et cetera. It's going to be a drastically changed situation. But more importantly, many restaurants are not going to get up to their 100% run rate by the end of June. So we're going to be working to try to extend that period where they can apply those PPP funding so they can have a longer time to ramp up to full capacity. Listen, this is a tough situation in making these decisions, but most importantly, I think that as we do this, it's incumbent upon all of us to practice good hygiene, to wear masks. I think it's going to be important for employers to provide PPE to their employees who are on the front line to keep them safe as we move to open up the economy.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We appreciate it. Brian?
We also wanted to address Nevada's dispensaries. They aren't eligible for federal help. How can we make sure cannabis companies can get SBA loans? Congressman Horsford, let's start with you there.
We have a bill that we've introduced, sponsored by Congressman Earl Blumenauer, the committee that I serve on, the Ways and Means Committee. We believe that cannabis industry is a sector that should be eligible. In many cases, we have businesses cannabis businesses that are continuing to pay their employees. In fact, some of them are hiring and they're contributing to our community. I have a local business owner, Larry Smith, who owns G5, who literally helped provide hundreds of meals to our community and the local food bank. So many of our cannabis business owners are very involved in the community, and they need to be able to have the same opportunities to seek that assistance through the Paycheck Protection Program as any other business. So the bill has been introduced. We'll be pushing to have it included in a future relief bill in Congress.
And Congresswoman Lee, care to address the exact same issue and same question?
Yeah. Cannabis is dealing with the same obstacle that gaming has dealt with traditionally in accessing federal assistance. We now see cannabis legal. I think it's in 27 states now. So again, the intent of the legislation we passed was to protect paychecks. It wasn't to make a decision based on what industry or not. If the industry is legal, it should have access to those funds. So, there is a bill that we will consider as we take up CARES 2.0 to recognize that these employees have jobs too, and that's what we're working to protect.
Thank you both for weighing in on that issue.
Well, we have a few viewers who are going to ask their questions themselves. The first one is now from Joanne Harris. Joanne, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for taking my question. I would like to know if there will be retraining money, for example, to pay for a certificate program for people who have compromised immune systems, who need retraining and cannot go back to their former position.
Congresswoman
Like
Lee?
a grant, or a scholarship from the state and not the federal government.
Great question, Joanne. Sorry to cut you off there. Congresswoman Lee, would you like to tackle that one first?
Yes, thank you for that question. That's a really important question. I sit on the Education and Labor Committee. We just had a Zoom conference meeting yesterday talking about the provisions in KLAS 2.0, and workforce development is going to be a key provision in making sure we're not only getting funding here. I have a bill that will increase our community colleges' partnership with private industry so that we can get funding to retrain individuals, especially those who would be high risk in this situation, to make sure we can train you for a job where you're not going to put yourself at risk by doing that job. So most definitely we will be including workforce development money that will help you in this next bill.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Congressman Horsford, what is your reaction to Joanne's question?
Thank you, Joanne. It's a great question. And our state actually applied for and received today a $4.5 million grant to help dislocated workers in your exact question and being able to be retrained. And so that program will be administered.
Again, I think a lot of these restrictions and lifting of them will depend on infection rates, modeling, but most importantly, a much more widely available testing regime across this country to ensure that, we can test people and get the results immediately so we can stop the spread immediately. You know, if you test someone and it's 5 days until you get the results, that's 5 days of them being in contact with people who may not know that they've been in contact. So we have a lot of infrastructure to put in place before we can know that we've established full and free travel without putting people at risk of being infected and potentially death.
Congressman Horsford, could you tackle the same topic, please?
I just want to add that this is incredibly important to our tourism-based economy. And I think that in addition to making sure that there are good, sound policies for international travel, we really need to focus on domestic travel. I want to see the TSA be completely reprogrammed, just like we did after 9/11. People need to be pre-screened before they get on an aircraft for a domestic or international flight. We have people flying in right now from hotspot cities into Las Vegas without any screening, without any testing. That is not going to be a way that we can protect our community, our economy, and our workforce from the spread of this virus. So we need to invest in the resources in the TSA and Homeland Security for them to be able to do that. We also need to make sure that our airports have the infrastructure in place and the funding in place to support this effort as well. All of our airlines need to be required to increase the precautions that have to be taken on flights. There have been conversations about distancing passengers in aircraft, possibly readjusting the seats. Whatever it takes in order for travelers to have confidence and to feel comfortable that they can get on an aircraft or get into a training and not have the exposure is something that we need to do. This is important to the future of our tourism economy here in Nevada and across the country. And so I know through the efforts that we're doing in Congress and the congressional committees that we are on, we will all be pushing for this because it's the only way to get us open safely and securely in a way that we don't come back and have to close because of a spike later.
Thank you both for those answers, and Steve's going to take it away now.
First, Congresswoman Lee, I didn't give you a chance to answer Noah's question about the mail-in election. You and Congressman Horsford are both on the ballot. Do you have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, first of all, 90% of Nevadans have never really voted by mail. So there's going to be quite a shift in education of our voters. And I think that it's incumbent upon all of us, obviously, again, as Steven mentioned, our KLAS for doing what you do, but also nonprofit organizations to educate people on just what the process is. In fact, today I received in the mail my notice of mail-in voting. One of the things that we're fighting for, on top of the $400 million that we got to get to states to help with this mail-in system, is also in Nevada, the Secretary of State released her proposal, which allowed for only one in-person voting site per county. What that means is in Washoe County and Clark County, 78% of the population lives in those two counties. So, when you think about putting in place a system that will keep people safe, I mean, in my opinion, the early voting and the early voting tradition that we had in Nevada, if you could take precautions to protect the poll workers, but basically we need to offer some more options for in-person voting for those people who may not get a ballot in the mail, might not be able, blind individuals who may not be able to fill it out, et cetera. We have to be able to offer other alternatives and more availability for people to go in person to vote, and obviously doing that in a safe manner as well.
That answer. Let's talk about Nevada's current ban on evictions. It's in place for a few months, but are there federal steps that need to be taken as well to make sure people don't lose their homes as soon as the state ban expires?
This is so incredibly important, and it's come up more and more during the telephone town halls that I know we're all having. And I want to again commend the Attorney General Ford, our state treasurer, Zach Conine, as well as our governor, for putting in place some safeguards with preventing people from being displaced due to eviction. On the federal level, we did pass a provision for banks to have to work with lender or people that have their mortgages to do a forbearance. But unfortunately, too many of the banks are going to require a lump sum payment at the end of that forbearance. And while there may not be interest and other penalties, that lump sum payment may not help if you've been out of work for the last few weeks. So there are measures that are being considered by Congresswoman Maxine Waters and the Financial Services Committee to provide more housing assistance. I would like to see a direct housing stipend that's provided. This would ensure that money helps cover the rent, but it also covers that landlord's expense. We've heard from a lot of landlords, not the big chains, but the small landlords who also have expenses to pay and cannot afford to cover those expenses. So those are the types of approaches that we need to take on the federal level while working with our state officials.
Thank you, Congressman. Congresswoman Lee, what do you think about that question on evictions?
Yeah, in the CARES Act, we included several provisions to prevent evictions and foreclosures, forbearance. Just got guidance today that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac will not be requiring the lump sum payment at the end of the forbearance. I just wanted to point out Senator Catherine Cortez Masto just sent me an email today. She has an incredibly robust resource guide around housing. So I encourage everyone who may have housing questions about evictions, about their rights. She includes some links to organizations that can help you with housing questions. So I encourage everyone to go to her website. She just emailed that today, and I found it an incredibly helpful resource for people who are struggling with these issues.
Sounds good. Thank you both for your answer. Kirsten.
Well, as we wrap up our virtual town hall, we do know that we're going to have a new normal for quite some time, aren't we? But what permanent changes, if any, do you expect? Let's have you answer that, Congressman Horsford, to start.
Well, first, I know families are struggling, and many workers who have been laid off and are furloughed are simply worried about how they're going to make ends meet. And so many of our small businesses who may literally have taken out the savings out of their own account in order to start that business. We're fighting for you, and we understand the dilemma that we're in. I was there after 9/11. I helped lead a lot of the rapid response efforts to help tens of thousands of workers get the assistance that they needed. I served in the state Senate, and I was the majority leader at the time when we had our recession in 2009. So I understand the implications of these budgets. But when we talk about going back to normal, I also want to talk about the fact that there are a lot of income inequalities, health disparities, and injustices that are being exposed through this pandemic. And what I don't want us to do is go back to a normal where those inequities and those health disparities continue. I think that we need to have a true investment. I am for universal basic income. I believe that we need to provide worker health coverage protection through COBRA payments for up to 15 months so that people do not lose their insurance during this pandemic. I believe that we need to fund our state and local governments in a way that protects essential services. And yes, we need to help our businesses, including our mom and pop sized businesses, so that they have something to reopen when it's time to fully reopen. So those are the things that we're fighting for. We look forward to continuing to receive people's input, but just know every single day that we're working hard to address these needs for all of the people throughout our community. Thank you.
Thank you. And Congresswoman Lee, your insight.
Listen, I think that this pandemic and the crisis is going to change many things about our society, some for the good and some for the bad. I mean, for instance, you know, I have spent a significant amount of time over the last 6 weeks doing a lot of video conferencing with people I never thought I'd ever get them on a video conference. So I do think that there's opportunity that for increased communication, but we are going to have to make a choice as a society on what we're willing to give up in terms of having some type of security. And I liken it to after 9/11, we never had to, you know, pass through metal detectors, take our shoes off to get on an airplane. But after 9/11, we had to take those steps in order to protect ourselves and, you know, make sure that we're safe on an airplane. Think about how we're going to translate that into protecting ourselves against the spread of a virus. You know, Apple and Google are developing applications that will help you basically track your exposure to coronavirus. So I think there's going to be a lot of consideration to how we exist in spaces, how we shop, how we dine, how our kids go to school. I know that some universities are even looking on doing online courses in the fall or mixed courses where half the days you do online learning and half the days you're in school so that they can practice social distancing. So I believe that like the flu of 1918, the World War II, the Vietnam War, we saw major shifts in our society, and I expect we're going to see that as a result of this. Some of it not so good, but some of it will be good. And I just want to point out that I always like to look for the silver lining, and I know for many of our families who are literally desperate because they have not received the funds that they need to pay their bills, buy food. But I have seen incredible acts of generosity and kindness. But more importantly, the understanding that we are part of a community and our behavior, individual behavior, impacts our entire community, our entire country. I think that's an important thing that hopefully will have positive impacts as we evolve out of this. So I think we're going to see some major shifts in terms of how we think about sanitation, how we think about germs. We've already done that, how we travel, but hopefully the positive side we will see too. We've already seen that in this great city, in our community, people who've set up food banks on their own, people who are checking in on their elderly neighbors. And so, I hope that we'll see an increased sense of community, which has always been the strong part of our community in Las Vegas. And like we say, Vegas strong. I think we will come out of this stronger and better, but more of a sense of community.
Let's end on
Vegas
stronger
strong.
and better.
I like that. Vegas strong, stronger and better.
And absolutely. We are in trying times. That is obviously clear, but there are better days ahead. We appreciate you speaking as leaders to our viewers. We do want to point out we invited the entire delegation, and Representatives Horsford, Titus, and Lee were the individuals that agreed to spend this hour with us, both on TV and online. And we'd be remiss, we did it on television, if not also wishing Mr. Horsford a happy birthday once again.
Yes.
This is actually his birthday, so I
Thank you
hope
for spending this time with us. My goodness.
I hope this is followed by a birthday dinner at home, of course. Thank you both so much for your time. We do really appreciate it, and we know our 8 News Now viewers appreciate it as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening. And of course, we'll be awaiting our governor tomorrow at the press conference where he will lay out the roadmap moving forward.
That we will. Well, good night to you. Thank you for being with us for this online version of a congressional town hall. We'll have much more tonight on 8 News Now at 11. We thank you, Steve Sebelius, Kirsten, and we bid you a good night.